Here in the UK, two parents have been found guilty of the manslaughter by gross negligence of their newborn daughter. She was found dead.
Hello, sorry mate. You just stop for a second. Stop for well, I need to speak to you.
But his appetite.
No, please. I've got bread and stuff.
I'm not going to make you a sandwich. We need to work out where your child is, mate.
I've got food to eat.
Yeah, we got a child to find.
Picture this. A newborn baby girl, barely days old, her tiny lungs gasping for warmth in the bitter January cold. While most infants are swaddled in hospital blankets, safe in heated rooms, this precious soul is fighting for survival in a makeshift tent, hidden somewhere in the English countryside. Her cries echo into the frozen night, but no one is coming to save her. This isn't a nightmare. This is the horrifying reality of what happened to an innocent child whose own parents chose their twisted obsession with staying hidden over her very life. I'm talking about the case that rocked Britain to its core, the story of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, and the baby daughter they let die rather than face the consequences of their actions. Let me paint you a picture of who Constance Martin really was before she became a household name for all the wrong reasons. This wasn't some lost soul from a broken home. Constance was born with a silver spoon so bright it could blind you. Her father, Napier Martin, was a former page to Queen Elizabeth II. Think about that for a moment. Her family had direct ties to the British royal family. The Martins owned a sprawling estate in Dorset worth millions. Constance attended some of the most exclusive schools money could buy. She had a trust fund that most people could only dream of. But somewhere along the way, this woman who had every advantage life could offer became fascinated with the very thing her privileged world had protected her from danger. Real, raw, destructive danger. And that danger had a name: Mark Gordon, the predator she called love. Mark Gordon wasn't just a bad choice. He was a walking red flag wrapped in a criminal record that should have terrified any rational person. This man had spent 20 years in a Florida prison for rape and battery. 20 years. Let that sink in. He was a registered sex offender who had been deported from the United States back to the UK. When Constance met him, he was exactly the kind of person her family's money and status had always kept at arm's length. But Constance didn't run. She didn't listen to the horrified pleas of her family. She didn't care about his violent past or the obvious danger he represented. Instead, she fell headlong into an obsession so consuming, so utterly destructive, that it would eventually cost an innocent child her life. How does a woman from British aristocracy end up with a convicted rapist? It wasn't love, it was something far more twisted. It was rebellion taken to its most deadly extreme. By 2022, Constance had already lost several children to social services. Read that again, several children. This wasn't her first baby. This wasn't some tragic mistake with a first-time mother who didn't know better. The authorities had repeatedly intervened because they recognized what Constance refused to see, that Mark Gordon posed a serious threat to any child in his vicinity. But instead of protecting her children, instead of choosing their safety over her toxic relationship, Constance doubled down on her destructive path. When she became pregnant again in 2022, she knew exactly what would happen. She knew social services would be watching. She knew they would try to remove this baby just like they had the others. And instead of addressing the root cause, her relationship with a dangerous predator, she chose to run. Think about the selfishness of that decision. Think about the calculated nature of it. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment panic. This was a deliberate choice to prioritize her relationship with Mark Gordon over the safety and well-being of her unborn child. In January 2023, when Constance went into labor, they were already living like fugitives. They had been moving from place to place, using cash, avoiding cameras, staying one step ahead of authorities who were trying to ensure this baby's safety. But when those labor pains started, when that precious little girl was ready to come into this world, any normal parent would have rushed to the nearest hospital. Any loving mother would have put her child's health above everything else. Not Constance Martin. Not Mark Gordon. Instead of seeking medical care, instead of ensuring a safe delivery for their daughter, they made a decision so bone-chillingly selfish that it defies all human understanding. They decided to deliver this baby in secret, without medical supervision, without proper facilities, without any regard for the life they were bringing into the world. Can you imagine a newborn baby taking her first breaths not in a sterile hospital room surrounded by trained professionals, but in some hidden location while her parents plotted their next move in their sick game of cat and mouse with the authorities? On the 5th of January, 2023, their car caught fire on the M61 motorway near Bolton. Inside that burning vehicle was evidence of what they'd been hiding: placenta and bloodied towels that told the story of a recent birth. When police and emergency services arrived, Constance and Mark were nowhere to be found. They had grabbed their newborn baby and vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene that would launch one of the most intensive manhunts in recent British history. But here's what haunts me about that moment: they could have stayed. They could have told the emergency responders that they had a newborn baby who needed medical attention. They could have chosen their daughter's life over their freedom. Instead, they ran. They took a baby who was less than 48 hours old out into the January cold and made her a fugitive before she could even focus her eyes. 7 weeks of living hell. For 7 agonizing weeks, this couple dragged their infant daughter through a nightmare that no child should ever endure. They used fake names. They paid for everything in cash. They moved from place to place like criminals, all while carrying a baby who was growing weaker by the day. They were spotted on CCTV cameras across the country: Brighton, New Haven, Liverpool, Essex, always on the move, always looking over their shoulders, always putting their selfish desire to stay hidden above their daughter's basic needs. Can you picture it? A newborn baby who should have been in regular contact with pediatricians, who should have been receiving routine checkups, who should have been safe and warm and loved, instead being carried from place to place like contraband. The winter of 2023 was brutal. Temperatures dropped below freezing night after night. While other babies were tucked safely in heated nurseries, this little girl was exposed to conditions that would be challenging for a healthy adult, let alone a newborn whose body couldn't regulate temperature. And through it all, Constance and Mark convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. They convinced themselves that keeping their baby away from authorities was more important than keeping her alive. By February, they had set up camp in the South Downs, living in a tent purchased with cash from an outdoor equipment store. A tent in February, in England, with a newborn baby. The sales assistant who sold them the camping gear later testified that they seemed nervous, agitated, and completely unprepared for outdoor living. They bought the cheapest equipment available, a flimsy shelter that offered virtually no protection from the elements. This is where their baby girl spent her final days. Not in a crib surrounded by toys and love, but in a freezing tent where her parents cared more about avoiding detection than providing basic care. The baby was developing a cough. She was losing weight. She was showing all the signs of a child in distress. And still, these two adults chose their freedom over her life. The discovery that broke a nation when police finally caught up with them on the 27th of February. After weeks of searching, they found Constance and Mark walking along a road in Brighton, but the baby was nowhere to be seen. For 2 more agonizing days, they refused to reveal where their daughter was. 2 days of precious time that could have meant the difference between life and death if there had been any hope left. But it was already too late. The baby's body was found in a little shopping bag, buried under garbage near their last campsite. A tiny, perfect little girl who never had a chance, who never felt warmth except for the brief moments in her mother's arms, who never knew safety, never knew comfort, never knew the love that every child deserves. The autopsy couldn't determine an exact cause of death. This precious baby had been dead for too long. But the jury heard the truth that every parent in that courtroom already knew in their hearts. This child died because her parents valued their relationship and their freedom more than her life. During the trial, the full horror of their choices became clear. Text messages revealed that they had been planning their life on the run for months. They had researched how to live off-grid. They had prepared for everything except how to keep a newborn baby alive in freezing conditions. Constance took the stand and tried to paint herself as a loving mother who was just trying to protect her child from an unfair system. She claimed she was breastfeeding, that she was caring for the baby, that she never intended for any harm to come to her daughter. But the evidence told a different story. The evidence showed 2 adults so consumed with their own selfish desires that they willingly subjected an innocent child to conditions that any reasonable person would know were deadly. Mark Gordon, the man whose criminal past had started this whole nightmare, sat silent through most of the proceedings. The convicted rapist who had convinced a privileged woman to throw away everything for him couldn't even speak up to take responsibility for the death of his own child. The verdict came down like a hammer of justice, guilty of manslaughter. The jury saw through every excuse, every justification, every pathetic attempt to shift blame. They saw the truth that Constance Martin and Mark Gordon killed their own daughter through their reckless, selfish actions. But here's what haunts me, what should haunt every one of us. This baby girl didn't have to die. She could have been saved at any point during those 7 weeks. If her parents had chosen love over obsession, if they had chosen her life over their twisted loyalty to each other, she would be alive today. Instead, a little girl who should be celebrating her first birthday, taking her first steps, saying her first words, bringing joy to the world, is gone forever. And for what? For the delusion that 2 adults could outsmart an entire police force? For the sick fantasy that they could live off-grid with a newborn baby in the dead of winter? The echoes of innocence lost. This case isn't just about 2 people who made terrible choices. It's about the fundamental betrayal of the most sacred bond that exists, the bond between parent and child. It's about what happens when obsession becomes more important than love, when selfish desire trumps basic human decency. Constance Martin had every advantage in life, every opportunity to make different choices. She could have left Mark Gordon the moment she learned about his violent past. She could have chosen her children's safety over her toxic relationship. She could have sought help when she went into labor. But at every crucial moment, when an innocent life hung in the balance, she chose wrong. She chose a predator over her own children. She chose running over surrendering. She chose her freedom over her baby's life. And Mark Gordon, the man whose very presence started this deadly spiral, he knew exactly what kind of destruction he brought into every life he touched. He had spent 20 years in prison for violent crimes, and yet he allowed another innocent child to pay the price for his existence. A legacy of loss. The baby in the bag will never grow up. She'll never laugh, never love, never live the life she deserved. She'll never know that her mother came from royalty. Never know that she could have grown up in castles and estates. She'll never know anything at all because 2 adults decided their own desires mattered more than her life.